so much
morning.
for joining us, Dr. Timpson.
This is exciting.
It is exciting.
Nice to find fellow travelers even through cyberspace.
Amen. That's right. That's right. I know. And the more we do this work, we discover there's quite a few of us out there that are passionate about the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's hope that, I don't know about you two, but I can't imagine getting involved with social media. I can't keep up with email. So, I mean, I have hopes that this will be part of a positive revolution for change, but boy, it's a challenge to keep up with.
It is, and there's so much on social media for sure that contributes in positive and negative ways.
Right, and potentially connects people like travelers who can support each other, encourage each other, and build something.
Right, very true. Well, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dr. Heidi PTAC. I'm a communication professor, corporate communication trainer. I'm also a conservative Christian living in the Nashville area. And my partner in crime in the Heart Perception Project is Kellie Newton.
Hi there, Dr. Timpson.
Hi.
I am a longtime massage therapist. I have a BA in International Foreign Policy from the University of Washington. But really, my time has been spent these last several years just being with people in their most vulnerable states and communicating with them. And I've also been trained in nonviolent communication. And I am a liberal non-theist who voted for Hillary. And my friend Heidi here voted for Trump. And we realized that it was really important for people like us to reach across a divide and try to find common ground with each other.
Good for you. Good for you. So are you a practicing Buddhist?
I have some Buddhist tendencies, but no, I do not claim to call myself a Buddhist. I am not deep into the Dharma. So
I continue to study because I find much value in this work we're talking about, from the commitment to nonviolence.
Yes.
The commitment to inclusivity and not taking a theological perspective on this or that or some other truth about God. I find that compelling. And the non-attachment argument, which I see, I'm doing a lot of work around sustainability, which underlies, I think, a hope to move forward across borders. And their argument against attachment, I find persuasive in terms of the future of not getting attached to our possessions, our degrees, our careers, etc. But that's going to be something we all have to wrestle with if we're going to deal with climate change. Anyway, so I'm coming more from the intellectual side and finding value in those dharmic teachings for a way forward.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Well, we're joined today by Dr. William Timpson. Bill, can we call you Bill?
Please.
Please, okay. So Bill is a professor in the School of Education at Colorado State University. He holds a PhD in educational psychology and has authored or co-authored over 10 books. My favorite part of his background is that he has worked for peace in over 7 different countries, including Northern Ireland and South Africa, and most recently in Burundi as well. Dr. Timpson has served as a Fulbright Senior Specialist on Peace and Reconciliation in Northern Ireland and also in South Korea. Is there anything you would like to add to that, Bill?
Well, I think our project in Burundi, we're now in our 5th year.
Wow.
And it may be the most challenging. Northern Ireland is on a clear peace process that's holding after hundreds of years of civil war and conflict. And as you know, South Korea is a bit of a stalemate there, although North Korea gets headlines. In Burundi, they're coming out of 40 years of conflict that started with a genocide and then evolved into civil war. The focus for our project in this small little university upcountry, University of Gozi, is sustainable peace and development. That we're not going to have peace unless we also find ways to climb for them to climb out of poverty. Poverty is inherently destabilizing. And there won't be development unless there's peace. So this work is really at the, and what you two are doing is at the cutting edge of how do you bridge historic differences that were imposed by colonial powers. The Germans and the Belgians came in and said, you Tutsi are superior people. And they laid down a heavy educational, ideological, political agenda to support that. And it was the classic divide and conquer. You get the minority dependent on the colonial power, and there's a sad connection there. So we're having to unlearn that, to cross these historic boundaries of tribal differences that the colonists imposed. And what's exciting is this little university in an area that remained peaceful. I keep going back to Elise Bolding's work. Do you know her work on cultures of peace? She makes the argument, and I've been persuaded for some time, that the news for sure and historians pay a lot of attention to the tragedies and the conflicts and the wars, and we don't pay enough attention to the places on the planet where peace is broken out, either micro or macro. So she argues those are much more complex issues, and this little area, region, Gozi in Burundi, remained peaceful despite holy hell breaking out all over the country. So it's a fascinating place. They have a deep commitment to peace and reconciliation, crossing boundaries. And I'm there learning as much as I can and contributing where I can. So at the end of the day, we're finding usefulness in both of our relationships. And it's exciting to be invited into a place that wants to look seriously. So the big goal at this little campus is that every graduate in law, medicine, agriculture, computer science, communication, health science will have some basic skills and ideas around conflict resolution. So when they meet up with people who are different, like you and Kellie, there are ways of moving forward without retreating into polarization and certainty about my way versus your way, and that's the goal. So it's an ambitious agenda, and it's exciting.
That's so exciting, really is. Yeah. One of my questions is to ask you, how is the division that we're experiencing right now in America similar and different to some of the experiences and what you've done in your work around the world, what you've seen?
Boy, that's a big question.
That's a big question.
Should we go on to Twitter or something to engage in that conversation, or?
You only get 140 characters on Twitter. Right. That might be challenging.
That's right. So I think we need a broader dialogue about that. So that's I worry about the country. I listen for echoes of Germany in the 30s in some of what's happened, with a minority being elected, with a lot of bravado and chest beating and my country first. And we just had Holocaust Awareness Week at this university, and we saw some films from that era, and disturbing. We're not there yet. I don't see brown shirts in the streets, but the militarization of police, the fact that we have our 800 bases around the world, the get tough policy on some of the most vulnerable populations. I mean, that has some scary echoes of Germany in the 30s. Closing the door on immigrants without any conversation about how much this country benefits from all the talent that comes to this country and stays. We're draining talent from many parts of the world. That I was in South Africa years ago, and they were lamenting how they put a lot of public money into training doctors. And so many, as soon as they graduate, take off for Europe or the US, where the salaries and the conditions are better. Mm-hmm. And, here's this country that doesn't have nearly our level of wealth, investing in future medical health professionals and then losing them. But we don't talk about that. We complain about the drug dealers that come across the border to feed our own addictions. So there are some ominous signs there, but I've been encouraged by the outgrowth of activism. People seem to have taken this a bit as a wake-up call. And one parallel, Heidi, I can point to is in Northern Ireland, after 200, 300, 400 years, however we want to count, from colonization by the British, the peace movement took hold and led primarily by women, and it was grassroots, and they made the strong argument to the historic powers there who had the guns on both sides that, you know, fellas, bombs and bullets have not worked. You've tried it for 400 years. It's time to find another way forward. And so eventually that led to the peace process, which is holding, and the de-escalation of weaponry, the decommissioning of weapons. So that, I look to that as a powerful example. The challenge is whether we will have to go through a cauldron of violence to get to some better place. And I certainly hope not. I don't think so. But people have to wake up and get involved at every level, local, state, and national. So the Northern Ireland example is persuasive. And then, as I said, in Burundi, the fact that that region remained peaceful despite conflicts all over the country and violence is very encouraging. And so I'm there trying to sort that out and understand more about how that happened.
Have you been able to really identify elements of what has helped keep Burundi so peaceful? Like you had alluded earlier when you were talking about that region that there are specific ways, and that sparked my interest to know what those ways are.
So we're in the process of digging out of that hole. This is the poorest country on the planet, so there are very few resources. One area is education. And so I draw from my experiences in Northern Ireland when I go there and point out that one of the things that's exciting about what's happening in Northern Ireland is the integrated schools movement. That clearly, when they look back at problems, the Catholic schools and the Protestant schools both had their own versions of history. They had their own heroes, and they were often antagonistic. And so people graduated from schools educated, but with clearly defined ideas about who's right and who's wrong, and who was at fault and who's to blame, who the enemy is. Mm-hmm. So that's one tack we're taking in Burundi, and there's an openness at this university. So that's one thing I would say, to crossing disciplinary boundaries. We're focusing on case studies and problem-based learning and project-based learning. In the US and much of the world, disciplines are organized we talk about silos. So you have the sociologists, and you have the economists, and the political scientists, and the ecologists. And these problems of peace and reconciliation, in my experience, cross all those disciplines and need support and infusion. So we're hoping that a case-based approach allows people to wrestle with real problems instead of just focusing on memorized knowledge that's passed down within narrow disciplines, to wrestle with real problems and focus on real concrete solutions. So that's, and their willingness to embrace that at this small university, I think, is one example for me of a way forward that's working. There's an openness to rethink the curriculum, even though as a small country, they had this imposition of the European model of top-down education and memorized knowledge. There's an openness to rethink all that. So that part's encouraging. We're hoping to tell the story of how it was that people did not turn on each other, and that's a work in progress. So there's one example I know of, and we're hoping to, in fact, this semester, I've got some instructors there collecting stories, hoping to tell us stories of local people who refuse to join one side or the other and join with whoever had the guns to persecute the other side on this tribal divide, Tutsi Hutu. So there's one example we know of: the military, which was controlled by the Tutsi, were given orders to execute Hutus with education. So that's where the genocide came in. And there was a colonel in the Gozi region up north that refused that order at great risk to himself, a direct order. And he said, no, I will not turn on the other. So it feels like they had religious leaders, community leaders, leaders in business as such as it was in government, that refused to divide and refused to buy into the worst of the hierarchies. The Germans and Belgians imposed this hierarchy that the Tutsi, the minority, got all the advantages of the educational system. And there's evidence that in the Gozi region in particular, Hutus faced that prejudice, but they had opportunities, some opportunities within the school system. So we're trying to sort that out and how that happened. So schools and just a deep appreciation for being at peace with each other. And we're trying to broaden that now to the environment as well. So peace for ourselves, peace within ourselves, peace with others, and peace with the greater environment.
So teaching peace as a value seems to be a bedrock principle that you want to help them fully internalize.
And here's the high wire act, is because, I mean, we have a medical education program, and so these graduates have to be able to perform at the highest levels in terms of medical knowledge, et cetera. So to bring in from the side a whole nother curriculum of peace studies is problematic. And so we've gone to problem-based learning, which many medical schools have embraced as a better way forward. Mm-hmm. And my argument is that the skills for working with problems and cases and projects are the bedrock skills of peace building. So it's improved communication, cooperation, negotiation, mediation. Those are all skills that allow a medical student to work in a problem-based environment. So moving away from just sitting and memorizing knowledge to a more interactive environment. And that's how I'm selling this focus on critical thinking, that we have to learn better skills for listening, empathizing, understanding, and that is useful in every profession, in every discipline.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. I see that for sure.
But you don't see it in many places. Harvard Medical has a commitment to problem-based learning, but no one talks about peace education within that curriculum. And it would be easy to make that connection, but as many of my colleagues in this work say, peace still is can be a dirty word in some circles. It smacks of weakness and disloyalty and et cetera. So people don't see it, don't see Gandhi's argument that peace building takes even greater strength. And the coward picks up the gun and shoots, and the peace builder is able to stand strong in the face of conflict and oppression.
I was struck by when you were talking about what elements were present that created peace in the areas that you worked, was that willingness not to identify people as an other. And that to me seems key, that as long as we are othering each other, that peace is not possible. And it's almost like we have to lay that importance down to even step into willingness for peace.
Yeah, and that's a much more complex challenge than just deciding in a certain moment, well, I will stop
Yes.
and end my biases against the other. We know in Northern Ireland that these biases start as young as 4 years old.
Yes.
Wow.
So they're getting it from parents and community and schools and over. And to deconstruct that will take some creativity and some effort. But there's the value, and the young people in Gozi are clear. They want to move into a more inclusive future. They're recognizing that they inherited a lot of these biases against the other from politicians on one side or the other who are wanting to attract support, etc. And so we've talked with the young people about friendly competition in sports, about music festivals, about using art, about using theater to promote interactions and to draw on what we know about people working together who are from different sides of the fence, working on a common goal. That's probably the most powerful way to unlearn prejudice and racism and move forward. So the young people embrace that. One of the difficulties, one of the challenges is how we talk about the past. So whether in the US we talk about the legacy of slavery or the genocide against Native folks, the internment of Japanese Americans, all those evidence, history of exploitation. There in Burundi, it's delicate about, yes, we want to understand the past. And there are other examples around the world, but there's some sensitivity that if you talk about it directly, will you inflame conflicts that have been laid to rest? Will people be so enraged by what they hear? So not that you forget about it and move on, but there's some sensitivity of how it's broached, because there are people on both sides in Northern Ireland and in Burundi that thought they were fighting for their community who have blood on their hands. So how we talk about that, how do we honor the individuals and their sacrifice, but condemn the prejudices and the biases and find a way forward, takes some complexity. And so our focus at this university on critical thinking, I think, will help that effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I noticed that earlier in our conversation, you were talking about your own perspective on some of the political unrest and what we're experiencing here in the United States today. And I noticed there was a good bit of fear about the future. I heard that fear in your voice about the future. And I think for many of us, it is that fear particularly that provokes some defensiveness in us and
Sure.
make it even more difficult to achieve the peace and reconciliation.
Right.
So my question for you is, what do we do with that fear when we're afraid? What can we do with that and still be able to move forward toward each other, lean into each other, and move toward reconciliation?
Great question. I think there's this course I'm teaching by distance in Burundi this semester will raise awareness about different ways of understanding that. So for instance, over the weekend, I proctored a conflict resolution process with 4 advanced Buddhist teachers. And 2 of them had gotten into serious conflict, and there was real pain involved and suffering. And one clearly was afraid of the other, and the other had and admitted she had outbursts of anger periodically. So one of the models I'm teaching in Burundi is transactional analysis. It's an accessible model. the parent-adult-child based on the, the historic psychoanalytic of superego, ego, and id, but very accessible. So in a local high school, kids who are trying to deal with anger issues, for instance, gang members who have been socialized to fight and fight quickly and putting themselves and others at risk, have successfully used TA to understand the emotions that well up, either fear or in response to fear, aggressiveness, so flight or fight kind of responses. So TA, using that model, they can use their adult to talk about the feelings and not necessarily act on them, and that's what's gotten them in trouble. And then the parent in them is saying, we need to find a different way forward because this gang life is just taking you down, and the only thing out there looks pretty dark and dismal if you continue on the path. So that's one example of how I think we can give common citizens, students and others, a skill set to step back when they feel the fear or feel anger and aggressiveness when they feel threatened. Instead of running or fighting, we can give people some skills to talk about it, to think about it, talk about it, and find other ways forward. So that's one example we're experimenting with.
That's good. That's good. Thank you.
So have you and Kelly found ways of communicating across your theological and political differences?
We have, and we've had to, because in the work that we're doing, we realize if she and I can't do that, then we have no business trying to teach it.
Right.
So for she and I think one of the things that has been very helpful for me is to learn to be aware of what is happening in my body as I'm getting more and more amped up, because that's usually going to be what happens right before I say something that's hurtful that I don't need to be saying. So being really self-aware, but then also staying in the moment with Kelly, really listening to what she's saying and hearing the emotion in her voice, and then learning to do that reflective listening where I say, I hear you saying this, is that correct?
Right. So I would say I've been sort of trying to sort out what works on that path. So I've been experimenting with myself and my students with meditation as a way to help people focus in on what's happening to themselves in the midst of chaos or concern or fear or threat. So to be able to stay centered in the midst of crisis is one avenue I'm working. The other is sort of finding and committing to regular opportunities to do what the two of you are doing. So I've been volunteering for restorative justice in Fort Collins, Colorado for 14 years. So once a month in the morning, I get to practice with young people who have committed to crime and helping them see another way forward, not guilt-tripping them or punishing or berating them or moralizing, but talking through what motivated them to steal, what are some options, how can they give back to the community. So like you were saying, Heidi, it forces and demands a great deal of empathy and deep listening to understand what those motivations were. And then I hold up for myself some examples from this work around the world. In Northern Ireland, I sat with there are a number of different peacemaking, reconciliation, small groups, activities, projects going on that never make the headlines because there's no blood, where people who were victims, either in one case there was two women and I interviewed them, one still had a bullet near her heart, an assassin tried to take out her friend coming out of an office building in the city of Derry. The other one was a daughter of an IRA soldier So she was the terrorist in her community and shunned and discriminated against. And her mother somehow raised 7 kids, fairly desperate poverty. So she had a lot of anger. Her dad spent time on the run or in jail. And they signed up for this peace building effort to cross the divide, exactly what you two are doing. And they would sit on a weekend with people who were bomb throwers and assassins and had convicts and people on the other side who were soldiers who had committed some of these acts. And they would focus at a very fundamental level on hearing the other to understand. So they get to tell their story, and the rules were very simple: sit and listen, use empathy, use reflective listening to really understand the other side, and then you turn around and you become a listener. And when they talked about the process, both of these women really brightened up, that suddenly they had a way to get beyond feeling angry and victimized and contribute in a constructive way towards a way future. And they admitted that they learned some things about the guys on the other side, mostly guys who were in the IRA and had weapons, that many of them, all of them, thought they were defending their community. They had family support. They were part of organizations. There were issues of loyalty and patriotism and all that surfaced. So at the end of the day, instead of a Nuremberg kind of prosecuting, let's prosecute the hell out of everybody who was involved in that conflict, it was more of a reconciliation process. How do we move forward and not to forget the past, but learn from the past and build towards a new and different future. So I hold on to that as a model. If those folks can do that, and if I had a child soldier in my class in Burundi, if he can, and this was dramatic, and I'll tell you this, we were talking about the genocide in Rwanda and how the Quakers had set up a reconciliation process, a workshop, and people were moving off the edges and understanding the other. And the film was called Hope, Chizuri. Really powerful documentary. And I had a child soldier in my class, and he said, you know, watching this, I would like to go back to the villages that I was forced to attack. So he was kidnapped at age 11. He was given a gun. There were guys behind him with guns, and they said, you will attack these villages or we will shoot you. So he was involved in several attacks, and then he escaped, and now he's back in college and trying to put his life back together. And at the end of this, he said, you know, I would like to go back to those villages and ask for forgiveness. And I'm still overwhelmed by that level of deep compassion for someone who was forced to do what he had to do on penalty of death and execution, and wanted to reach out and ask for forgiveness from the villages that he attacked. So I'm convinced, you know, the Buddhists talk about basic goodness in everyone, that if we can find ways of staying centered in times of crisis, we can cross these divides and move forward. Got to get the guns out of the equation. You know, that was clear in Northern Ireland, in Burundi. There are cheap weapons. Anytime you have a civil war, there's a plethora of cheap weapons around. And, you know, and in the U.S., I think we will have to wrestle with this military mindset that's too often the solution that people go to. And we have to find other ways forward. We can't keep putting poor inner city minority kids in jail to, you know, it's more a reflection of our inequality and our legacies than it is good policy, because not much happens when you put people in jail for years. So that's where I draw hope and inspiration for doing this work.
It's very hopeful to me to hear that you talk about that. And what I'm really struck by is the process of sitting and listening to the person on the other side the divide. Anyone can do that.
Right, that's
and
right.
it brings a sense of agency, personal agency to the peace process.
Right.
Because the conflict, the greater conflict, whether it's in our, the United States or in a war-torn area, is that it seems too large to have any impact
Right.
on. But when
Right.
people have a sense that they actually have agency in the peace process,
Right.
it
Right.
shifts the energy.
Right. And there's a skill set there, Kelly, in terms of not just sitting and listening and thinking, coming up with counter arguments, but stretching to empathize.
Yes.
In Covey's work, think first, make the effort first to understand the other, use empathy, and develop those skills. Those are all very accessible. And in Derry, Northern Ireland, this was a process not run by psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers. It was community activists who believed that they could move forward with this very simple process of listening to the other and empathizing and understanding the other. And so it was very inexpensive, and it seemed from my interactions there very powerful and very effective, and accessible to anybody in the public. And I see it with kids in tough inner city areas. They can learn these skills and help themselves and help others.
I believe it.
And I should sign off soon. Do you have a final kind of question?
Well, I think we want to say that we are so appreciative of all you have shared. Thank you so much for being a part of this and for your encouragement to us as well.
Yeah, and I think you two are modeling something very powerful. We know from this last election that people are finding the news that is most convenient or comfortable for them, that fits their ideology. And you two are modeling something about crossing a divide where people talk about truth. This is a religious truth, or this is not a religious truth, and liberal and conservative, and getting out of those camps and finding. So treat yourself, both of you. Go visit Northern Ireland. Go talk to Mayred Corrigan Maguire, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and hear about the grassroots effort led primarily by women who got the boys to put the guns down and find another way forward.
Love it.
If they can do it, we can do it here and elsewhere.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thanks for organizing this. Take care.
Bye-bye.